Good afternoon, everyone. This is Alan Murabayashi speaking to you live from the PhotoShelter World Headquarters. We have a very special webinar today with, I'm going to call her the Justin Bieber of photography, just because I haven't seen any other photographers kind of come close to the number of followers that she has. But it's going to be a really interesting discussion, not only about kind of the mechanics of Instagram, but I think some academic discussions about what it all means in the first place and why we bothered to do that. Before we start, some housekeeping notes. You can ask us questions by tweeting at us at hashtag PhotoShelter. So you can see my lower third here, which you can't really see. Yeah. So whenever you think about asking questions, tweet it to us at hashtag PhotoShelter, and we'll try to insert it into the conversation. And with that, let me introduce you to Pei Ketron. How are you doing, Pei?
I'm doing well. Thank you. Thanks for having me. Also, I didn't get a chance to tell you not to call me the Justin Bieber of photography. So.
Okay, well, we'll skip that.
Okay.
You know, Pei, when we first announced the webinar on Facebook, of course, we got kind of some of the snark coming from comments. But I thought it was actually a good question to ask. So I actually want to start with that, and I'll actually show you kind of a screen grab of what a few people were commenting.
Okay.
So here we go. The first question, and this is out of sequence because it's doing by popularity. It says followers or customers. When we said you have 830,000 followers, it says followers or customers. And then this other guy says, exactly, Brad, what's your conversion rate in dollar amounts? And then finally, social media, where your ego grows but not your bank balance. I guess I'm curious as to, you don't strike me as the type of person who does this to build your ego. I know you're a very early adopter of the platform. What's sort of your response to this? Not necessarily from like a defensive standpoint, but are these sort of legitimate questions when professional photographers are kind of coming to Instagram?
Yeah, they're absolutely legitimate. I think that one of the problems that a lot of us have is, you know, how much time do we put in to a platform like this where, you know, it takes up a significant portion of our time on a daily basis. If we're going out and we're shooting and we're pulling these images back, we're editing them, and, you know, throwing them out there for the world. And the return is not something that we might see immediately necessarily. I think that for a lot of us just getting started on Instagram, it's huge to be able to see likes coming in on our photos. We like seeing our follower count grow, but it is true. You know, how does that convert over to actual real business, real customers? And I think that that's something that, from a social media standpoint, it takes a while to understand, and it also takes a while to build. So it's not like somebody coming in, even though they're a very popular photographer, they sign up for Instagram, they have a lot of followers. It's not like that immediately turns into business. I think that the idea behind social media is that it's ongoing. It's the ongoing building of relationships between you and people who could potentially become customers. There's no one here on social media is deluding ourselves, telling ourselves that yeah, every one of my likes on my photos is going to turn into a job, or is going to be a customer who's going to actually buy a print later on down the line. The act of liking a photo is so minimal, it's so small, it takes, you know, a millisecond of your time, that it's easy to do that, but to turn it into something else is something that is not easy. And you know, the idea is that I'm building these relationships through these people who are following me. They get to know me over time, and then in amongst them, you know, I know that every 14-year-old who's following me isn't necessarily going to buy a print from me or hire me to do a job, but hidden in amongst all those followers are some people who are very influential and who may decide in the future that I'd be good for a job that may come up.
Do you think that there is... I was having a conversation with Jim Richardson, who's a National Geographic photographer, and he thinks that there's power in the direct communication that we have through social media with an audience. In the traditional media sense, it always took a publication to distribute our images to a larger audience. We might have had a small audience, maybe we had a local gallery in our hometown or whatnot, but to really get to even 10,000 people or even 1,000 people is sort of unheard of from a direct publishing. And even with blogs, because blogs aren't a daily destination for a lot of people, you just don't see this sort of coverage on a daily basis where literally 800,000 people or 1 million people could see your photo. What does that mean for photographers nowadays that you have this direct connection to your audience?
It's actually like a pretty big responsibility for a lot of people who have a large audience on social media, because we can immediately post something and reach a pretty immense audience. And that's never been the case before. Suddenly, with social media, our audience is global. So we're reaching people all around the world in all different time zones, who we may or may not ever get the opportunity to meet in person or interact with. But I had an interesting interaction with my, interesting incident with my father fairly recently. So my father is a painter, an artist, and he has been doing art for all of his life, right? And I fairly recently took a photo of one of his drawings that he did, and I put it on Instagram and said, you know, here's a photo of a drawing that my dad has done. And he was amazed just watching the amount of likes and comments come in on this.
Yeah.
And he said, you know, because he's old school, traditional, you know, gallery shows and talking to people in person, really only being able to reach the network of people who are immediately in his vicinity. You know, he used to travel to Taiwan to do art shows, you know, all around the country just to get his work seen by people. And he said that watching Instagram and seeing the number of likes come in on my photo was incredible. So he said to me, you know, the number of people who have liked your photo, not just, you know, the potential people who have viewed it, right, because you don't know that necessarily,
Yeah.
But just the number of people who have liked my photo in the past, you know, 3 or 4 hours, he calculated exceeded the number of people who had even viewed his paintings in the last 30 years.
It's crazy.
Yeah, we have this, it's so powerful when you think of it in that way, you know. Before I used to take photos and I'd put them on the internet and I'd be really excited. You know, Flickr, when I first started, you know, they tell you how many people have viewed or how many times your photo's been viewed, and, you know, 10 views, right? That's so small, but then as your audience grows, you realize that you're just able to reach so many people, but with that also comes responsibility, right? You have to kind of monitor yourself, make sure that you're putting out good content and that you don't want to waste anybody's time.
I want to go back to this notion of monetizing Instagram, or at least talking about the e-commerce, the emerging e-commerce that's happening on Instagram, and start by looking at someone that both of us know, and that person is Alice Gao. And for those of you who don't know Alice, I guess it's fair to say that she's Instagram famous, but it's not accurate to say that she's an Instagram photographer, because she's a quote real photographer, whatever that means nowadays. She shoots with a DSLR camera. She shoots with her phone when it's necessary. But she's also been hired by brands to promote to her massive audience.
Right.
Is this sort of the reward for growing a large audience on Instagram or social media in general?
I don't know if reward is the word that I would choose. So I do have to say that I know Alice on a personal level, and she, just to be clear, does photograph with her iPhone only on Instagram. So I would consider myself in the same boat with her as far as, you know, we both do photography outside of Instagram with DSLRs, with film cameras. We get hired by clients outside of the mobile photography realm. But for us, Instagram has been this great opportunity to open a lot of doors. So we're both iPhone only on our Instagram accounts. And I would say that you mentioned this being a reward. I don't think it's a reward. I think that it's part of the process these days for a photographer who's internet and social media savvy. that these are the channels that we need to get good at and learn how to leverage for our own, personal and professional gain. I think that if there's a photographer out there who's trying to be successful in today's photography world, they have to embrace Instagram and social media across the board.
So what do you say to, I mean, I'm hearing less of this nowadays, but what do you say to old school photographers who say that taking an image with a smartphone like an iPhone is a gimmick? Like, why not get the best camera that you could possibly get and then use Instagram as a distribution platform? Why go through the gimmick of taking that with the iPhone?
I don't know if I would say, I don't know if I've heard people say that it's a gimmick. I would say that a lot of them say that they discount it as a form of actual photography. You don't have to.
Okay, that's accurate, yeah.
Yeah. They don't think that it's true photography. You don't have to choose your settings. You don't really have to think about what you're doing. You're just kind of going with auto mode all the time. And this is a question that I get asked a lot. And usually what I tell people is that as a photographer, for myself, and I think I mentioned this, if people have read the PhotoShelter interview, that the guide that just came out a couple days ago, in that I mentioned that I've been taking photos for 13, 14 years now, and I'm extremely competent on the technical side, right? ISO, aperture, shutter speed, I have that all nailed down. I understand it extremely well. I can do it without even thinking about it. What I've loved about just immersing myself completely in mobile photography for most of my time shooting these days is that it makes it so that I have to focus on nailing my composition and nailing like the mood and the emotion that I want to convey in a photo. Instead of having to think about these other things or worry about these other things, it just gives me a really simple way to just make sure I'm creating the best image that I can with that tool, right? I don't think that it's taking anything away from traditional forms of photography, and I think that the advantage of it is that it's actually bringing so many people into photography who had no interest in photography before. So many people are coming in, they're joining Instagram because it's fun, maybe they want to post photos of just their day-to-day life. And then they realize that, hey, some people take this really seriously, and some people are actually out there working their asses off to get great photos on a day-to-day basis, and they're creating fine art with their mobile phones, with their mobile phone cameras. So those people then realize, hey, maybe this is something that I want to do also, and they get really into it, and they not only stay with the mobile phone, but they pick up a DSLR. And then there's a new wave of people who are picking up film cameras again as well. So for a traditional photographer to discount mobile photography is to kind of doom the future of photography, right? We want people to come start taking photos again. We want people to pick up DSLRs, and we want people to go buy film and keep these film companies in business, right? We don't want to lose that.
We've seen companies like Mobile Media Lab. We've seen photographers like Alice who have dealt directly or indirectly with brands. And then we've also seen a few photographers who've kind of come through the mainstream press who have had print sales online. And have, there are these stories where, I made $15,000 in a day. It sounds almost like an infomercial or some sort of spam. When you think about what the commerce opportunities are for photographers in like a year, what does that look like to you? Do you think it's kind of more of the same, or do you think there's going to be kind of a tangible evolution in one direction?
There's always going to be an evolution. So, I feel like this Brooklyn photographer guy making $15,000 on a flash print sale is it's pretty incredible. Even I have a really hard time wrapping my brain around how that actually works and is successful. But some people can work the system really well in a way that works for them. I absolutely don't think it's realistic for your normal person to expect to have that kind of return on a print sale that they do through Instagram. Like I mentioned earlier, I know that a large percentage of my audience is, I know there are a lot of teenagers on it. I know there are people who are not going to, they're not in the position either financially or in their lives to invest in art, or it's just not something that they really do. A lot of people aren't really buying art these days to put on the walls necessarily, or they have stuff that's already up, and why do they need to keep adding more to it? So I know for a fact that if I did a print sale on Instagram, if I offered a print for sale, I would not make $15,000 in a day, no matter how I approached it. So those I think are very aberrant cases. They're not normal, and we shouldn't expect that to become the new norm. I do, however, think that the evolution right now is at the point where brands are realizing the reach of social media influencers. They understand that a lot of people who have a huge following on Instagram are kind of the key right now to reaching audiences that they might not normally reach. So they want to take advantage of that. They want to approach Instagrammers with big followings, or YouTubers or bloggers with large followings, just to get, spread the word about their brand. And what we have as social media influencers is that long-term relationship with the people who are following us, right? They don't necessarily, many of the people who've been following me have been following me for years, right? They know me, they know a lot about me because I put out a lot on the internet, and I like to think that sort of portrays me as, a real, genuine person, somebody they'd actually want to be friends with and potentially work with in the future. So in the future, as this evolves, I do think that there will continue to be work with social media influencers, but the platforms keep changing, right? We weren't expecting, well, we kind of were expecting Instagram at some point to start. Sorry, we were expecting Instagram to start including advertisements at some point, and they have now. So that in and of itself kind of changes how we as Instagram influencers can affect our audiences and how brands will want to work with us. So you never know what's going to happen next, and we'll find out.
You've resisted monetizing your Instagram feed. I know that when we talked offline, you do a lot of humanitarian work, and you've at least reserved the notion of monetizing your following for something that is very personal to you. Can you talk about that a little bit more?
Yeah, I do have to say that I do get work through Instagram, and I do get work that involves me posting photos on Instagram. Just as a matter of full disclosure, it's not. I have worked with brands who have hired me to do Instagram gigs. So Mercedes, for example, was one. I did a photo for them fairly recently. I don't know if you saw that one. I think it's a challenge because as photographers, we still need to pay our bills. We need to pay our rent. We need to put food on our tables. We need to be able to afford gear. So I like to think that I've been making choices that, that I've been accepting work that sort of suits me, my personality, my interests long term, that is still work that I'll look back on and be proud of, and not sort of feel like I've sort of sold my soul just for a buck, right? I don't just accept any offer to post stuff on my feed. I do try to work with companies whose missions I support, who are doing work that I feel comfortable with, and who are just, embracing social media and doing really interesting things. So I like to think that a lot of the jobs that come into me are jobs that will turn into jobs outside of Instagram and will not remain only on the platform.
Right, right. Let's shift to some brass tacks right now, because we're getting a lot of questions about, I just joined Instagram, I have 25 followers. How do I get to 1,000 followers or 10,000 followers? Is it having consistency of subject matter and style? Is it captioning and hashtagging my images? What's the formula for success nowadays?
I don't think there's a tried and true formula. I think that everyone has their ideas, and I'm certainly not by any means an expert on this. I wouldn't I wouldn't say that I'm necessarily an expert, but there's absolutely, I mean, there's so much to be said for the quality of the content that you're putting on the network, right? Content drives everything. So the first thing you have to do is make sure you're posting photos that you feel like other people are going to want to see. So post good photos, post them consistently so that people who might stumble upon your feed know that you're actually actively posting, right? If I go to somebody's feed and they haven't posted in weeks, I'm not very inclined to follow them because, you know, who's to say when they're going to post again, or have they abandoned the platform? You know, they're not consistent, and I don't like that. So post consistently. It's so important also to engage with the community around you, right? You can't be on social media as a lone entity, right? You can't be the lone wolf on social media and expect everyone to come to you, unless you're Justin Bieber, right? Just some like insane celebrity, right? So for most of us, so what we have to do is really interact with those around us. It's not all about us, right? Everybody else is doing really cool things too. Everybody's out there taking good photos, making posts, and we have to sort of embrace the rest of the community. It's all about networking, making connections, making friends. So I would say not only post consistently, but reach out to the rest of the community in ways that are natural. So people can spot somebody who's just trying to connect with you to gain you as a follower. They can spot those people a mile away, right? So what you want to do is actually get out there, get to know other people. So if you're just new to Instagram, start following people whose work you admire. Start leaving them comments, genuine, real comments, and try to build relationships with them. See who they're following. That's a great way to find new photographers to follow. And just really immerse yourself in the community. Start to build connections. Hashtags they can be valuable if used properly. I think that overuse of hashtags is a problem because it feels spammy and no one really wants to see it. Even if it's buried in like a second or third comment, people still see it and people still feel like it's kind of spammy.
Yeah.
So I would say really be careful with that. Think about how useful your actual hashtags are. So for instance, hashtagging something like donut, right? Donut might be a hashtag that gets, you know, thousands and thousands of photos per day. So if I hashtag a photo donut, and then later on I expect somebody to be able to find my photo with the hashtag donut, they click into it, and within minutes there are going to be a dozen other photos hashtag donut. And then, so within an hour, your photo is so far buried that no one's ever going to see it.
Yeah.
So such a generic hashtag like that isn't really going to help you out. So just think about the hashtags you're using before you're using them. Geotag. I found photographers that I like by looking at geotags and seeing other photos that have been posted in the same area. So it's really just about being really involved on the network and using it actively and in a way that really encourages genuine connections with people. And I think that it slowly starts to come from there, and then it'll start snowballing at a certain point.
It's funny you talk about the networking effect of social media, and I've found that when I post a geotagged image, whether it's a shop or a restaurant or maybe a particular location, I might get the owner of the shop commenting like, "Oh, nice photo," and it's almost like a perfect entree to go back to that shop and say, "Hey, I'm the guy who took that photo."
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, you know, when you're talking about photographers who are actually legitimate photographers who are doing this for a living, a big part of what we need to do is brand ourselves and make those connections with our customers, right, or our potential clients. And so for any business out there, because I'm essentially, as a freelance photographer, my own business, so for any business out there, one of the most fantastic things about social media is that immediate ability to reach out to my client or customer and have a conversation with them. It makes it so that even though we may be across the globe from one another, we can still be in the same room and have a conversation. And it's pretty new that we can have that immediate connection with somebody that we admire, whose business we're patronizing.
We talked at the top of the broadcast about kind of the old school photographer, not thinking that iPhone photography is a legitimate form of photography. It sounds like you're also saying that being more social than you necessarily had to be in the past. You know, maybe in the past, if you were a successful photographer, you were that lone wolf photographer who spoke to 3 editors and they booked you for all your jobs during the course of the year, and that was sort of the extent of the networking that you had to do to be successful. And now it seems like because there's so much content and distribution is so much more diffuse, having these much more a larger number of relationships with people, even if they're virtual, is almost necessary for a modicum of success nowadays. Do you think it's accurate statement?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, it's called social media for a reason, right?
Yeah.
You need to be social on it. It's in in these modern days with the internet, I feel like there are so many channels for us to consume information. There's photos being thrown at us from every angle. Like Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, everything is just, you know, the news is just shoving all this content at us, and there's absolutely no possible way that we can keep up with all of it. So in this world that's just noise, there's so much noise, right? There's so much noise. How do you stand out from the rest of the crowd, right? And part of that relies on your ability to distinguish yourself in some way. So find what you're good at and push it out there for people.
We've seen the support for video come along, but I haven't seen sort of a mass adoption of photographers. I've seen photographers sort of dabble in it, and some of them are making interesting things. Do you think it's just because that form is in its infancy on this platform, or do you think there's something sort of inherent about a 15-second clip that just there's not enough to convey, or maybe the editing tools are sort of primitive?
I don't think that 15 seconds is necessarily the limiting factor. I think that people can do some pretty awesome things in 15 seconds. What I do know, and you know, I've been faced with this myself as a photographer, photography and videography are very, very different genres. Just because I'm good at one does not mean I'm good at the other, right? It's a whole different type of storytelling, storyboarding that I'm not used to as a photographer. So I'm not very good at it because that's not what I've been working so hard to get good at for all these years. So I do know, however, that photographers who are embracing filmmaking and videography, those photographers are more likely to get hired for gigs because they can do multiple things, right? So if I was to get hired, for example, to go and take photographs down in Antarctica, which would be amazing, if I was to get hired to do that or to be up for a job where that would be a possibility, are they going to hire me, or are they going to hire the photographer who's just as good as me, who also makes videos, right? Kind of killing 2 birds with 1 stone if they go with the one who can do both. So I think that a lot of photographers these days I've seen are embracing videography. They want to learn it. They want to get good at it. That being said, I don't think that it's absolutely necessary. You know, I would like to learn it, but I don't plan on taking up videography for my career.
The types of images, you know, when I look at the popular images on Instagram, to me there's always kind of this aesthetic, this kind of quiet, Zen-like aesthetic. And or there's sort of, even when they're travel images or in the most crowded city in the world, it seems like there's nobody there and it's like super peaceful. Is there something about aesthetics and composition that you think makes an image successful on this platform?
I think there are definitely things that the Instagram crowd are drawn to, right? There are types of images that, number one, work extremely well with a mobile phone camera. You know, kind of the wider, really not shallow depth of field where just like everything is in focus. Those, I mean, that's what your camera does. So the types of images that you can capture and capture really well are images that use that wide angle and the fact that you can have that really long depth of field. So there are images absolutely that do well. There are, you know, a lot of people are there's this wave of people capturing what people call epic images on Instagram, and some people won't post a shot unless it's epic, and whatever that means, right? And so it's basically, I know that this photo is going to get a lot of likes on Instagram because it's the type of photo that people like on Instagram. Whereas a portrait, right? iPhones and other mobile phone cameras don't quite have what it takes to capture portraits as well as a DSLR right now. So portraits often don't do as well on Instagram, and people know that. People talk about that all the time. There are hashtags trying to promote portraiture, which I think are fantastic. So yeah, people are drawn to certain things. There's a certain aesthetic. There's like a style, an Instagram style that a lot of people are following, and it is sometimes confined to a region or a certain network of photographers on Instagram, and so it takes a lot longer to find people who are doing different things on Instagram, but they're out there, absolutely.
Food photography is obviously very popular, a very popular genre. And I want to go back to sort of this travel photography too. Are those successful because they're sort of aspirational in nature? And then when it comes to food photography, there's obviously good food photography and bad food photography. Does that fall into your category of pet peeve of stuff that you see in your feed or when you're exploring Instagram?
No, I love food. I want to see food all the time. So not at all. I'd be happy to see more of it. I'm not sure entirely what you're getting at as far as food photography. I mean, I think there are people who, everybody loves food, right? Everybody loves a good meal and will get googly-eyed when they see some like amazing spread on a table. So I think that given the right circumstances, if you're photographing food in good light and set up fairly nicely, prepared nicely, absolutely it's going to do well on Instagram. People are, of course, going to love it. That's kind of a no-brainer. What was the other part of your question?
I guess, is there an aspirational quality to photos that are successful? Because not everybody can travel around the world, but some photographers do. And is that what compels me to follow someone who's like in Antarctica or taking a beautiful photo from Machu Picchu? And I guess it kind of goes to this question of photography can be used for commercial purposes. Photography can be used for documentary purposes. But there's a phrase going on that's been around for a little while, but the notion of social photography, which is photography as a form of communication rather than necessarily like a visual imprint of history. What are your thoughts on social photography?
Social photography, I can see playing a huge part in what a lot of us do on a day-to-day basis on social media, right? Post with photos, and if you're looking at like a Facebook post, for instance, a post with a photo is more likely to get more likes than a post without a photo, right? It catches your eye. You can see immediately what that person's trying to convey. And there is that whole idea of sort of filtering your life on social media and only showing people the good parts, right? I think there was a video fairly recently that was released that kind of showed how some guy went through his life and he only posted about the highlights of his life, not the lowlights. So I think that for a lot of people there is this tendency to sort of post only the things that are awesome about their lives. And right. I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing. We share what we want to share with the world. We share what we're proud of. We share what makes us happy. And that's kind of what draws other people to us, right? It attracts followers, right? People want to see that I'm traveling around the world. They want to see the food I'm eating. And yeah, I think some of it is aspirational. Yeah, we want to, like, I wish I could be there, or hey, maybe I should add that to my list of places that I'd like to go in the future, and eventually I can make that happen. I think it's everyone wants an escape from their own life, especially if it's like a office job where they're in a cubicle all day. They can escape the doldrums of their lives by looking at these photos that of places that they would love to visit one day.
So speaking of this sort of highly curated life, as your following has grown, do you feel more pressure to really think about the editing and the curation of the image that you put up? Has it made you more sort of paranoid about which images you're going to share?
Yes, but I don't think that's new necessarily for me at this point. That's something that happened pretty early on in my Instagram life. Initially, when I joined Instagram, it was the first week, and I connected with 30 of my friends, and we were, here's a selfie with bedhead first thing in the morning. Here's my really poorly lit breakfast. I used to be an elementary school special ed teacher, and I would post like selfies with my students, and then as soon as it evolved beyond just these very close friends of mine, I immediately shut down the more personal parts of it. I mean, I would never post a photo of my student now. Um, and when I realized that it was something, that Instagram was a place where I could actually create art, I immediately switched over to that mindset where I was still sharing moments of my daily life, but I wanted to make them more artistic. I wanted to make them look better, look as best as they could. I was living in San Francisco, and I would take BART to work every day. So every day I would try to get a different, unique, cool shot on BART or at a BART station, and that can get pretty hard after a while if you're making that commute on a daily basis. But
Right.
it was a fantastic way for me to push myself to be in a situation where I'm like, there's nothing really around me that looks good right now. So how do I make a good photo out of this? And I wasn't carrying my DSLR to work every day. I was carrying my iPhone. So that's what I used. And I took some really awesome photos during that time. But yeah, I do curate my feed. I want to post photos that are beautiful and that people will enjoy. At the same time, however, I try to remind myself that this is still my feed. A lot of photographers I know who have gotten to this point have actually broken off and created separate feeds as their personal feeds, so they can share moments of their daily lives again without sort of that pressure or without disrupting their official work business feed.
Right, right.
I haven't done that, and so I feel like I've done a fairly good job of keeping them combined into one. So I'm still showing people day-to-day moments in my life, and I'm still sharing things that I want to share that are still meaningful and valuable to me. So there are tons of photos that I post that I know, I'm like, this isn't really going to get a lot of likes on Instagram, but I'm okay with that because this is my feed, this is my life, this is what I want to share. And people are following me. Some people, a lot of people I think, are following me, not just for my photos, but because they like me, I hope.
That's actually, we got a question that's basically the question to that answer. Gonzalo Guzman asks, how can you balance using Instagram as a tool to brand yourself as a person and as a photographer? And I guess I would ask you, in the context of your own feed, you have a photo of yourself, maybe one every 15, every 20 images is a photo of you. Mm-hmm. Is that sort of a deliberate way to kind of personalize who's behind the camera, or is it just, this is me, this is my feed, this is what I was doing, I wanted to put myself into the scene?
I don't think I never think about it in deliberate terms like that. It's never like, oh, I haven't posted a selfie in a while, people should be reminded of what my face looks like, so I'll post one. It's never something like that. I think that if I do post a selfie or a self-portrait, it's because I am in a circumstance under which I think that it would make for a great photo. So I will set up a tripod and set my iPhone on a timer to do a self-portrait if I'm somewhere and I have no model, and I think that a person would add good scale. I'll do that. I got a new tattoo, so I want to share it with my friends, and I know some people on Instagram I've spoken to before are really interested in it, so I'll do a self-portrait showing my tattoo. So that it's not deliberate in that way, but I think that just because I'm very vigilant about showing my life, I show up in my feed, and sometimes it'll be 100 images before I show up, and sometimes it'll be 2 in a row.
Yeah. You are a social media consultant as well as a photographer as well as a humanitarian person. When you put the shoes on as social media consultant and a brand or company comes to you and says, how the heck are we, it's one thing for a photographer or just a teenager to say, I'm snapping photos of my life, or these are the types of projects that I work on. How should brands be using Instagram, particularly when they don't necessarily have a physical product? Maybe there's a service brand. Is it not appropriate for them to be on Instagram or trying to push brand through that channel?
No, they absolutely should. So I do a little bit of social media consulting. I think I'm not really sure I would call myself a social media consultant as a job right now, but I've done it a little bit in the past, and I do some little contract jobs every now and then for social media marketing. So when a brand comes to me and they say, hey, you know, we don't really have any social media accounts, or we have them and there's nothing happening on them and you don't really know what to post on them, I think the first thing that they have to look at is, you know, what type of business are they? That determines really how much and how they should use their social media. And then they really need to look at what it is that they offer, kind of, you know, the same way that I mentioned earlier as far as photographers and business and ourselves as businesses. What is it that we have to offer that our competitors don't offer? And using social media is a fantastic way for businesses to demonstrate that, what they offer that others don't offer, how they differentiate themselves from the crowd, and also serves as a great way for them to stay at the forefront of people's minds. So, hey, I might not want to be shopping for a purse right now, but if I do want to shop for a purse, I just, you know, I saw Michael Kors in my feed, you know, just yesterday post this awesome purse shot. Maybe I'll go look and see what they have to offer.
Right.
So it's just staying current, staying relevant, and staying in people's minds.
I guess I want to spend kind of the last third talking more about strategies for photographers, and also, why don't we start with just the very basic question of, if I'm a professional photographer and I'm not on Instagram, and people like you have already amassed hundreds of thousands of followers, what hope is there for me to get onto this platform and be successful, and why would I want to do it in the first place?
I think that possibly the first flaw in that logic, in that question, is the fact that it's not a competition, really, as far as social media. I mean, if there's a successful photographer out there already and he or she doesn't use social media, they have to be doing something right, if they're already successful. So them coming onto social media, you know, if they start Instagram and they, you know, they maybe have 2,000 or 3,000 followers, that doesn't matter. They can still get great jobs because they're just using it as an additional method of communicating with clients, showing off their work. It helps them reach a broader audience, but it doesn't take over those previous methods that they were using in the past, right? It's all, there's no one solution to this problem of, you know, getting yourself out there to the world. There are so many platforms that photographers can be using. The Instagram is just one of them.
We started by talking about return on investment and, you know, what's the conversion rate of such and such. I wonder whether there's other analytics that you think photographers should be looking at, like comments per post or likes per post, any sort of ratio like that, or is it really sort of dependent on the individual's photographer and what their goals are for the platform?
It's certainly dependent on the individual photographer and their own goals. I think that, you know, as a photographer who has done social media campaigns for companies and brands and tourism boards, everyone is different. So the metrics that this tourism board are going to be different. The methods that this tourism board uses are going to be different from the methods of this other tourism board, right? So everybody has to determine what's important for themselves, and you know, they look at things like, you know, not just number of followers, number of likes, you know, percentage of engagement, number of comments. They also look at a breakdown of, you know, where your followers are coming from. So they're going to target, if brands want to bring on a social media influencer, they're going to look at where your audience is as an influencer. So they may choose one photographer over another because they have more followers in Asia, for example, and that's right, the market that brand wants to target. So, and then there's also a lot to be said for the qualitative measurements as well, right? It's not all about numbers. So what we see on Instagram is a lot of people who have really inflated follower accounts because they've been put on the suggested user list. So I admittedly am one of them. I was on the suggested user list for a long time, so I built up a huge following because of that. So I have all these followers that have followed me, you know, from day one. They downloaded Instagrams. Instagram says, oh, maybe you should follow these people. They follow. They may never come back. So
Right.
there are a lot of people out there who have built their followers organically. They've never been put on the suggested user list, or they were on for 2 weeks and then taken off because they kind of did a rotation like that. But in any case, these photographers have grown followings by doing some of the things that I talked about before, just being consistent, posting really great content, interacting with the community, engaging others. And the ratio of their likes to the amount of followers they have is going to be a lot higher than mine oftentimes. So that all has to be factored in as well. And yeah, it really is up to the photographer to determine what it is that they want to be looking at.
I've heard that there are analytical tools that are available to huge brands that normal people don't have access to, and yet normal people have the potential to build much larger followings than even a lot of brands have. Do you get frustrated by the lack of analytical tools that Instagram has? Do you think that's sort of the next evolution for them to provide to the end users?
I do get frustrated sometimes. I mean, I don't often go in. I mean, there are third-party sites like Statagram, which is now
Iconogram, yeah.
Iconogram.
Something like that.
Something like that. So what we used to know as Statagram provided us with a lot of details about our account, you know, who's following us, who's not, hashtag usage, filter usage, that kind of stuff. And it can be really fun to look at. I personally don't spend a lot of time looking at it. I would like to have analytics available to me, though, when companies approach me or a tourism board approaches me and says, hey, you know, what percentage of your followers are in Asia?
Right.
And I don't know that, right? And right now, I'm just a normal person too. I don't have access to crazy tools or whatever, so I don't know how I would even find that out. I know that there are some paid third-party services that offer a little bit more detailed statistics, but yeah, I mean, I'd love for Instagram to have more detailed analytics. I honestly don't foresee it as anything happening anytime soon, though, because the number of people for whom it's valuable or necessary is still so small in the grand scheme of Instagram, right?
Yeah, yeah. When we had first talked a few months ago, the Explore tab on Instagram was still sort of a mysterious list of people that had been assembled, presumably by people that worked at Instagram. Since that time, maybe 6 weeks ago, a whole new Explore tab was unveiled to the world that is based on images that your friends are liking, which seems like a much more sort of democratic but also helpful way to find interesting images and interesting photographers. How does this change the game of sort of organically building the number of followers?
So I think in the past, Explore was more of I don't know exactly how it works, but in my eyes, it was always kind of a numbers game. So like these photos got a certain amount of likes or a certain percentage of likes that were enough to sort of push them into the popular page, because initially it was called the popular page, I think. Yeah. Yeah, and then it changed to Explore. So now instead of say, you know, this random, there were a lot of, you know, screenshots that were like double tap on this if you're a girl and like it if you're, or comment on it if you're a boy, just stuff like that, which got somehow massive amounts of likes. So they got pushed into the Explore page, and that's really not what most of us want to see. So it's infinitely better the way that it is now, and the way that it is now, as far as I can tell, is that it pulls photos from, yes, the people that you're following. So like, hey, a couple of your friends like this photo, you might like it too. Your friend was tagged in this photo, so you might be interested. This is popular in your country. I'm not really sure exactly how that works, and I'm not sure what country it pulls from, especially as someone who travels a lot. I'm like, I don't know if this is the countries that my account is registered in or the country I'm standing in. So there are still a few random photos thrown in there that I don't really know where they came from. But as far as your question, I think that I even personally experienced and had a lot of people talk about this in my circles, that when the new Explore page launched, they had a boost in the number of likes and sort of a more rapid gain in followers because of it. So I think that it's kind of naturally pushing us to network within Instagram and meet other people, just kind of branching out from the group that we're already involved with.
It does seem that it sort of inadvertently categorizes photos. So I, like you, I love food photography, so I follow a lot of food photographers. And as a result of that, I find new photographers because they're liking other food photographers' images. It does seem like a very smart way to do discovery. What other ways are you using to find photography? One of my frustrations is, every once in a while you'll see BuzzFeed, 10 photographers on Instagram you should be following, which is pretty much the exact same list that you saw on 3 other sites.
Yeah.
And there seems to be sort of a lack of curiosity on behalf of those authors, whoever they are. How can we find sort of hidden gems on Instagram?
Yeah. Well, I think that is actually, I imagine, was one of the goals of Instagram when they just decided to do a new Explore page. They wanted to provide a method for people to discover new content, because Instagram, the way that it existed in the past, I mean, now we have a feed so that we can see what our friends are liking. So whatever that third tab over is, we can see, our own news feed, and then we can see our following feed. So like this person I follow liked this photo and commented on this photo, and that was sort of the first tool that they introduced as far as discovery. And then the revamp of the Explore page is another fantastic way for them to encourage us to discover new content and to discover photographers who we might not have stumbled across before. So I think that word of mouth, as far as one photographer telling another photographer that this other guy is good, is one of the best ways to do it, and they've now built that into the platform so that we don't have to do that on our own. People can just go in and kind of see what we're liking, and that to me is fantastic. So for me right now, I discover new content and new people to follow that way. And then I also kind of do it the old school way, where when I meet people, get introduced to their friends, and usually people I respect tend to be friends with other people that I'd be likely to respect and whose work I would like.
Other than sort of over hashtagging of images, what are some of your other pet peeves that you see on Instagram that would cause you to unfollow or not follow someone in the first place?
Oh, this is kind of a personal question. I don't like photos that are very heavily processed, like super saturated or super dramatic skies. I'd like photos to look like they could be realistic. I understand, yes, black and white, sepia tones, whatever, that's all fine. But just, I've been in places with people who have a tendency to overprocess their image, and I look at my photo and it's just like light blue, maybe like a few oranges in the sky, kind of sunset, and then so I post that, and then the next photo that's posted is like from the person standing next to me, and it's like bright orange, there's just like color everywhere, and I'm like, I don't actually know, where did that come from? So I don't like images like that. I don't think that Instagram is a place to really, how do I say this? I don't feel like religion is something that should be prominent on Instagram as a way for, it shouldn't be a place for people to tell me that I should be religious, right? So I tend to not follow photographers that I stumble across who are extremely religious on their posts. I also...
That's an interesting one, because it goes into a broader swath. I was talking to another photographer, and he said flag images don't do very well. Like when I post an American flag, it doesn't do very well because apparently I have a kind of international audience.
Mm-hmm.
And it's interesting to see sort of cultural differences and cultural sensitivities as you amass a larger audience. And
Yeah.
you know, for example, I mean, this might be a total stereotype for me, but I've seen sort of over hashtag use in Asia a lot, where there are like 10 hashtags,
Mm-hmm.
none of which seem to make any sense or have any discovery purposes to them.
Yeah.
So it's an interesting challenge to deal with culture and photography in this sort of social medium.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that it's fun. I think it's fun to see these cultural differences and to kind of get to know people from around the world that I've only known through Instagram, and just to see what their lives are like and the types of things that are important to them, and to learn from them. I think it's fantastic.
You sort of mentioned that when you were starting off and you were taking the BART, that you were in the same scene every day and you really learned to sort of work the scene. I have a
Mm-hmm.
question here, kind of asking I'm an amateur photographer. How do I get better? Is it simply repetition? I just have to take more photos, or is it something more than that? I need to have people critiquing my stuff to actually know what's wrong with this image.
I think it's a combination for sure. I think that the first step, that you can do on your own is to just go out there and take photos, and take photos all the time, and always be thinking about, find a scene that looks boring and looks like there's nothing there, and find a photo. Find something to take a photo in that scene that looks good, right? And it could be a macro photo of, a bead laying on the ground next to the dumpster or whatever, or it could be just looking at the bricks on a wall and getting a really, really intriguing angle where you cut everything else out. But give yourself assignments, even if it's not explicit or overt. Just, like mine was, hey, every day I'm on BART, I'm going to try to take a photo. Or, today I'm going to go out with the explicit intention of photographing only things that are blue, and do stuff like that. Absolutely get feedback and critique from others. Look at other photographers that you admire. Figure out what it is that you like about those photos, and see if you can convey that in your own photos. Imitation is the sincerest form of flattery. You cannot get by on imitation alone, however, right? So, but it's a great way to learn. So that's a good place to start.
The assignment idea is interesting. Instagram itself, for people who don't know out there, they run a Friday weekend assignment, and they call all of those assignments and they post their favorites on Monday. So in terms of a discovery mechanism to be seen by millions of people, that seems like not a bad one to use, potentially.
Yeah, absolutely.
We're almost out of time, and I wanted to end with an interview that I did with Jim Richardson from National Geographic. And here's the slide. I'll read it for those of you who can't see it on your screen. I asked Jim, your former National Geographic colleague Pamela Chen has joined Instagram as the editorial director, and photojournalist Teru Kuiyama is the photo community liaison for Facebook. What is the practical effect for the professional photography community of having these people in such high-profile roles? And he answered that this is evidence of an evolving medium, a recognition that something is happening that we should pay attention to. People with real talent are choosing to devote significant parts of their career to these new ways of communicating. They will both shape and respond to the future. I don't think anyone can seriously dismiss Instagram as important photography ever again. And it seems to echo like a lot of what you're saying, these walls between legitimate photography and iPhone photography and what makes a good photographer. All of these preconceptions that we might have had even 3 years ago have basically seemed to dissolve, because so much good photography is now going on Instagram. Do you have sort of some parting thoughts with that?
I agree that these walls are being broken down. There's no longer a big distinction between Instagram and other photography or other platforms as a photography tool, right? We're all out there trying to create great photos with whatever cameras we have, and I think we're doing a great job.
I think so too. I'm so happy to have you join us. I was kind of scared when we wrote to you, because it's like, oh, followers. I don't even have 1,000 followers yet, so hopefully I picked up some tips here today.
I hope
so. But hey,
so.
Pei, thank you so much for joining us. It was a great time talking to you.
Yeah, thank you.
In case you haven't downloaded it, you can go to photoshelter.com/resources and download the Photographer's Guide to Instagram, Pei contributed heavily to that guide as well with a lot of her insights. But I want to thank everyone for joining us today here on this Google Hangout. We'll have a recording of this available on the blog on blog.photoshelter.com. And we hope to see you again. Bye-bye.